Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. My name is Chin Hao Huang, and I'm Associate Professor of Political Science and co-director of the Center on Asia and Globalization. This evening's Hong-Siew Ching lecture is on weaponized interdependence, critical minerals in a fracturing world, and will be delivered by Global Distinguished Professor Sofia Klenzakos from NYU Abu Dhabi. Before we begin, a few words of introduction on this lecture series. The Hong-Siew Ching speaker series is supported by a generous gift from Mr. Tay Liam Wee, former CEO and Group Managing Director of Sincere Watch. This series is named in honor of Mr. Tay's late mother, Madame Hong-Siew Ching. We're deeply grateful for this gift, as it has enabled us here at the school to bring to Singapore a number of distinguished statesmen, policymakers, and scholars to meet, interact, and exchange ideas with our students and faculty, government officials, civil society and business leaders, and the members of the general public. More important, it is the vibrant discussion through this Hong-Siew Ching speaker series that helps us generate and advance new insights and ideas on Asia and the world in support of a more peaceful and prosperous global community. And this reflects a core mission of what my colleagues and I do at the Center on Asia and Globalization at the Lee Kuan Yew School. Since 2010, we have invited and heard from speakers like Richard Zeckhauser, Professor of Behavioral Economics at Harvard, Takahiko Naoko, former President of the Asian Development Bank, Rebecca Santamaria, former Executive Director of the APEC Secretariat, and Tom Friedman, author and columnist at the New York Times. Sophia, you are our 22nd guest of honor in this distinguished line of speakers in the Hong-Siew Ching lecture series. No pressure. We're very eager to what you have to share with us on this topical issue, and we know we'll be at the edge of our seats. I will now turn the floor over to my colleague and good friend, Selena Ho, Dean's Chair Associate Professor of International Affairs and Vice Dean for Research and Development at the school, who will formally introduce our speaker and moderate this evening's discussion. Enjoy, welcome again, and thank you.
It's a great pleasure for me to be here, and I hope you're all having a great evening, and welcome to the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. It is my distinct pleasure today, this evening, to introduce to you, Professor Sofia Klenzakos, Global Distinguished Professor in Environment and Studies and Public Policy in NYU Abu Dhabi. Sofia is really one of the foremost experts on critical minerals. She has been working on critical minerals even before they became the epicenter of today's geopolitics. She has published a number of books, and I specifically want to mention one book, China and the Geopolitics of Rare Earths. It was published by Oxford University Press in 2018. Now, this book was published before critical minerals, rare earths, became such a big topic in geopolitics today. So when critical minerals, rare earths became such an important topic today, her book became a must-read among all those who are interested in what China is doing and China's new monopoly of the global rare earth supply chain. Now, but Sofia's research is more than just about rare earths. She looks at critical minerals in general, but also the intersection of minerals, climate crisis, and the fourth industrial revolution, all of which are interrelated. Now, on a more personal note, I actually first met Sofia online during the COVID pandemic, when I was invited to speak at a project that she founded. And this speaks to her many varied interests, the geopolitics and ecology of Himalayan waters. So she and I share a research interest in resources and power, how we can understand the nature of power from a resource viewpoint. We are also interested specifically on how China uses resources as a source of influence and power. Now, so following our first online meeting in 2020 during the pandemic, we met for a second time in person when I went to NYU Abu Dhabi to present on a conference on environmental politics. And then we met for a third time when she visited Singapore last year. And today is the fourth time we are meeting. So I'm guessing we're friends now, right, Sophia? So it's my great pleasure to introduce Sophia and to moderate her talk. Now, let me say a little bit more about the topic, weaponized interdependence, critical minerals in a fracturing world. As you know, the technological competition between the United States and China has led to a scramble for access to critical minerals, beginning with rare earths. Now, China has taken a long view in investing in the technologies of the future and has secured access to critical minerals. It is on course to become, in Sophia's words, the world's first electric superpower, commanding the global EV and renewable energy markets. The United States is trying to reduce its reliance on China by building its own domestic critical minerals capabilities and relying on friends and allies for its supplies. Hence, you can see why it wanted to have deals with Ukraine and why it's trying to annex Greenland, right? Okay, so without further ado, let us now give a very warm welcome to Professor Sophia Kalotzakos.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for this warm welcome. And before I begin my remarks, I would like to thank the Hong Soo Ching Speaker Series for inviting me, having me, hosting me here in the Lee Kuan Yew School and the Center of Asia and Globalization. Special thanks to Selena Ho. Yes, we are friends. My wonderful colleague, whose exceptional work has over the years given us multiple opportunities to exchange ideas. So it's my second time in Singapore, and I cannot but be impressed by what this country continues to achieve, both economically, but also in terms of its global influence, that is far more than geostrategic. And frankly, there's nowhere better to discuss the tumultuous impacts of global geoeconomic competition, the weaponization of interdependence, and the seismic shifts to decarbonize and digitalize the global economy than here in Singapore, where so many networks meet. Technology is at the forefront, and geopolitical considerations garner serious examination and appreciation. This is what we know. The world order, as we understood it, is as it had been set up, as it worked up until now, seems to be in shambles. Volatility, unpredictability, and increasing geoeconomic but also military confrontation are on the rise. It's unsettling. It's discouraging. It's distracting. It makes it very hard to plan and even harder to stick to a plan. Governments have been forced to focus their energies on the here and now, leaving them less time to take in the entirety of the situation we're actually in. Of course, let's not mince words. The stability and predictability that we had grown accustomed to had largely been a product of America's desire to lead in this particular fashion. It had been a large responsibility, but also a strength. For some time, the U.S. has been reassessing its role in the world, especially as other nations gain strength, and particularly after China's extraordinary rise. But the level of turmoil that the world is faced with today is largely a product of the Trump White House. The impacts of what has been coined as the America First narrative is wreaking havoc on U.S. allies, rivals, partners, and competitors alike. Singapore, I understand, has been hit with a 10% minimum baseline tariff, even though it imposed no tariffs on U.S. products under the U.S.-Singapore Free Trade Agreement, and it runs a trade deficit with the United States. The European Union was not spared a 15% tariff and has been expending its policy focus and political capital negotiating without a clear understanding of what the end game might be. In 2024, the United States was the largest partner for EU exports of goods and the second largest partner for EU imports of goods. The EU exports to the US reached 531.6 billion euros in 24, and the imports 333.4 billion. Now, that's a huge economic partnership. The backlash in Europe is tremendous, as you must be looking at the headlines, and critics are speaking of European capitulation. Now, China declared as number one by Trump in his first term in office, and continued under Biden, by the way, struck back by placing 125% tariffs on U.S. imports after the U.S. administration slapped the PRC with 145% tariffs. Escalating trade tensions also resulted in restrictions by China on exports of rare earth alloys, mixtures, and magnets, jeopardizing production and creating outages, especially for car companies. A 90-day hiatus was reached in May and recently extended after President Xi and Trump agreed to negotiate. India was given a rude awakening. President Modi believed he had an excellent working relationship with President Trump, but finds his country hit today with 50% tariffs for buying Russian oil. 60% of their oil comes from Russia, even though the U.S. president continues to maintain a special relationship with President Putin and remains patient with Russia's delaying tactics and ending the war in Ukraine. President Trump and his administration's view of global stability is that for many years, it has served others in exploiting the United States. Using tariffs as a central negotiating tool, the president seeks to replace the global trading system helmed by the WTO with a series of government-to-government arrangements with a stated objective of shrinking the chronic U.S. deficit and of jump-starting manufacturing in the U.S. The objectives sound legitimate, maybe even warranted, but economists warn that might does not always make right. The situation is far more complex in an interdependent world than appears at first blush. To right this perceived wrong, however, the president is willing to bring down the entire international system. This is not a president who people mistakenly thought seeks American isolation. Quite the contrary, he is robustly interfering, reorganizing, and scrapping long-standing agreements. It's not that Washington has left the world. It's that the world is being pulled into Washington's web. Now, Trump's deal-making philosophy thus shapes and reshapes global relations. It is dynamic, not static. It is unpredictable and erratic. Many world leaders, scholars, policy experts, and the media now predict that these shock waves will bring down institutions that have upheld the world order. Let's hope they're wrong. First, because the system we built as a global community is a product of political competition and struggle, war, norms, values, decolonization, human rights, the rule of law. That is not to say that there haven't been many failures, but the system adapted and strengthened and evolved. Second, and more important, we have a bigger crisis on our hands that requires global cooperation, trust, and coordination. The current U.S. international policy of smoke and mirrors, distraction, arm twisting, trade warfare, and constant upheaval undermines our global focus on one major reality: the catastrophic impacts of the climate crisis on our livelihoods, our ecosystems, the global economy, and the planet overall. It's a pity on many levels. Importantly, because the nation whose scientists discovered the extent of the threat is now erasing the problem from the domestic policy lexicon. It also actively seeks to deprioritize discussions on global action on this front. Yet year after year, we experience extreme weather incidents, our infrastructures or natural systems are being destroyed. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen described this as a loss of assets, a loss of wealth. This is why in 2025, she made it clear that Europeans would stay the course, green their economy, and simultaneously pursue innovation and digitalization. China, for its part, is set to become the first electric superpower as it leads in EV and renewables production and rapidly digitalizes its economy to win the technology race. Beijing has also produced an ideational development framework that it promotes through the Belt and Road Initiative as ecological civilization. in a clear signal that the climate crisis cannot be ignored. The politics of upheaval, initiated by the U.S. as an answer to Sino-U.S. rivalry, comes with demands for economic decoupling from the PRC, and with the expectation that anyone trading with the U.S. will eventually be required to pick sides between the two superpowers. Most countries in the world are loath to live in such a bipolar system. They've already seen this video in previous decades. They prefer a multipolar world. Many of them are no longer weak. They have built up their economies, their societies, and their defense capabilities. Entire regions are now working together to increase their power, their influence, and prosperity. They would prefer to work both with the U.S. and China to maintain greater autonomy and preserve their options by spreading the risk. The view of global relations that Washington projects is thus outdated because it does not acknowledge this world of diversity. Still, the U.S. is difficult to bypass and ignore. It has been a well-oiled profit-making economy with much financial flexibility and transparency. The dollar has been the currency of choice, and the entire financial system has been run by the U.S. Up until now, it represented a stable democratic nation governed by the rule of law. It remains a large and unified consumer market with which others desire to trade. The U.S. served as the world's policeman. It has created defense alliances and partnerships with nations across the globe and has delivered critical aid in times of crisis. It has retained naval supremacy and kept the oceans open for global trade. It has been the architect of the most important global institutions and has pushed innovation to new heights. These assets, and many others that included higher education and now even fossil fuel dominance, have guaranteed its position as a leading power in the world order. Now, while these reasons account for why nations across the world have remained at the negotiating table, it is important to acknowledge that Washington is playing a zero-sum game that pushes international affairs beyond planetary boundaries and securitizes the fourth industrial revolution. If the global community does not compartmentalize and drown out the noise that each week serves up a new crisis, throwing the world into a tailspin, the turmoil will cost us everything. This is why we need to lean into the institutions we have and keep supporting them, but also transforming them to make them fit for the 21st century climate crisis era. It's why regional institutions and neighborhood collaborations are more important than ever. Bringing old partners closer, making new friends, and forging new pathways. Hedging, but staying the course, because living in an untethered world with no rules is a recipe for disaster. Rare earths and other critical minerals have today come to represent the enormity of these seismic geopolitical, geoeconomic, climate, and digital shifts. They garner constant headlines. And they have become a scramble for global power and to power the technologies that were meant to be our industrial solutions to the climate crisis. As Selena mentioned before, I wrote this book in the beginning of early 2018 called China and the Geopolitics of Rare Earths. Now, my academic research revolves around how the climate crisis impacts world affairs and how it creates realignments. You can understand the prism through which I'm seeing things today. I could not get my head around the fact that major industrial nations embarking on the green and digital transitions relied on supply chains for these indispensable minerals and their applications that were controlled almost exclusively by China, a rising key competitor. I wrote that book as a warning and a call to policy action because I believed that one day geopolitics would trump economics. It was a minority view at the time, in the ancient days of 2018. You can imagine. In 2010, just a short reminder of what made rare earths so, headlines, a maritime incident in 2010 in the disputed waters near the Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands in the East China Sea led Beijing to unofficially and briefly halt rare earth exports to Japan. China seemed willing to use economic statecraft to settle a geopolitical dispute. At the time, China held a near monopoly in the production of rare earths, close to 97%. It also dominated the entire supply chains for important applications in which they were used. Reaction by China's competitors were rhetorically intense, though short-lived, and because prices came down relatively quickly, the issue was put on the policy back burner. As a result, an important opportunity was lost, and China's competitors remained materially dependent on the PRC. At the time, China's competitors still believed that the rare earth crisis had constituted a mere blip and moved on to other issues they thought were more pressing. Geopolitics, after all, were not as contentious as they are today, even though Obama had already pivoted toward Asia. And Europe was increasingly viewing China both as a valued partner, but also an economic competitor. Reassured by their deep belief in the interdependence produced by a global supply chains and trade, they trusted that differences would be smoothed over and such a crisis would not last long. The rare earth incident was brushed aside as an exception rather than a rule. Companies returned to China to purchase the rare earths they needed because it made economic sense in the context of the need to maintain their competitive share prices and protect the bottom line. Mining for rare earths elsewhere and rebuilding global supply chains was in the end too cumbersome, too expensive, and necessitated long lead times. I'll just plug in a parenthesis. One American company existed for rare earths, and it went bankrupt during this period. And Lynas, the other major non-China company, almost went bankrupt until Japan saved them by giving them, $230 million at the time in order to keep them afloat. Had this not happened, both the alternatives would have been bankrupted. Fast forward a few years. When post-COVID, the green and digital industrial transition became the crux of the next big economic transformation. The West awoke to the realization that the PRC was ready and able to take on and lead the next global industrial revolution. For years and strategically, it had been securing its base and operationalizing globalization to consolidate supply chains, manufacture more efficiently, build up its nest egg, and prepare itself for what it had anticipated and interpreted as a growing encirclement strategy by its industrial and geopolitical competitors. Industrial innovation and production were no longer the exclusive purview of the OECD economies. Now, compounding the problem was the realization that the long era of stable resource competition was rapidly ending. In the course of history, if you recall, empires locked in their economic supply chains and managed competition. But since 1945, it was the United States, as the global economic hegemon, that defended and ensured that the rules and norms of world trade were enforced. In response to what had now become an unsettling power shift, China's competitors, including those who had been the fiercest defenders of globalized free trade, embraced government-led industrial policy to maintain and perhaps regain the ground they now view as lost. As a result, both the road to net zero and global digitalization have been subsumed by realist power struggles revolving principally around Sino-American hyper-competition exacerbated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Supply chains in the Fourth Industrial Revolution became securitized, a new world of club and fences has emerged, and changed what we knew as the 4 decades of globalization. What is certain is that the current strategy of hyper-competition is not climate-informed or climate-suitable. It constitutes an egregious policy failure when the world is facing the greatest threat to the global commons. Now, one reason might be that the green and digital transitions were from the start a product of compromise, an industrial answer to an overwhelming problem created by industrial modernity. The low-carbon transition was first and foremost an attempt to reimagine a pathway by which countries could keep economies growing, through the deployment of new technologies and the building of new infrastructures, hoping that the strategy would in time also reduce carbon emissions. Day after day, we see cracks in this plan. And increasingly, we're viewing a concerted effort to undermine its validity. International institutions have reported alarming stories about skyrocketing demands for critical minerals that mean thousands of new mines. Was this plan even possible? How could it be better when it would mean further ecosystem degradation, further displacement of indigenous communities, and unprecedented water demands impacting the most vulnerable but mineral-rich countries? Gradually, the wholesale buy-in in the electrification of transport was turned into a scenario of merely adding different technologies to the mix. That, besides electric, could include burgeoning hydrogen technology, while maintaining the combustion engine tied to fossil fuels. Now, these are all valid questions, often taken out of context, and a climate scholar, activists, and policymakers' worst nightmare. You hate these kinds of questions that make you wonder, is the solution not a solution at all? Half-truths have impact, and the setup of the dilemma is not meant to make an actual comparison between the system we have and the system of carbon-free capitalism that we intended to move into. It provides scenarios by which there are no societal changes, nor consumer behavior alterations. The goal is to maintain fossil fuels active as an indispensable energy source, especially given the U.S.'s newfound status as #1 global fossil fuel producer, an advantage that's difficult to forego. It's also a product of the West's delayed investment in the transition that allowed China to be decades ahead. In this reshuffling of power relations, geoeconomics have transformed supply chains into strategic assets and caused an unprecedented securitization of trade. Uninterrupted access to rare earths is no longer the only concern. The list of critical minerals has gotten much longer to include lithium, cobalt, but also inputs like gallium, germanium, indium, graphite, nickel, and even copper, for instance, that we need for the digital transition. Since 2010, moreover, China has consolidated its position as an assertive global superpower whose global agenda is transmitted through the BRI, new development banks like the AIIB, and the continued strengthening in ties with the Global South through FOCAC and CELAC and BRICS+. It has deepened its engagement with global institutions and exercises growing influence over them. Moreover, to the chagrin of its OECD competitors, it quickly became apparent that China not only controlled the supply chains, but had mastered affordable is the key word, large-scale production of green and high-tech products, pricing out European and American competitors. China undoubtedly used a wide range of policy tools, like subsidies and financing, to strategically leapfrog in the production of these products, building up development supply chains. In contrast, Beijing's competitors had shunned industrial policy, as we said, and that was a gross miscalculation. They belatedly realized that they would frenetically have to play catch-up. Tariff and non-tariff barriers became the instruments of choice to gain time, to reset, to recalibrate in order to compete. If you remember, before the recent American election, every day there were like new tariffs on electric vehicles coming from China. This was an attempt to stall the influx because they were ready and able to deliver, right? A recent IMF report spotlighted that 2,500 industrial policy interventions worldwide took place in 2023 alone. 2/3 of these were trade distorting and discriminating against foreign commercial interests. Advanced economies were openly declaring that they were now justified in using targeted interventions to make domestic producers more competitive and to promote growth in selected industries. The report further underscored that the most active sectors were military, civilian, dual-use products, new terms, the dual use, as a category in order to be able to make things strategic, and advanced technologies, including semiconductors, low-carbon technologies, as well as their components, such as critical minerals. More specifically, numerous policy initiatives and investments were directed toward the diversification of mining, refining, and entire critical mineral supply chains from mine to market. In time, the hype around critical minerals reached such heights that in April of 24, the Secretary of the UN, Antonio Guterres, launched a new panel on the critical energy transition materials that would address issues relating to equity, transparency, investment, sustainability, and human rights. Guterres stated that for developing countries, critical minerals are a critical opportunity to create jobs, diversify economies, and dramatically boost revenues, but only if they're managed properly. The race to net zero cannot trample over the poor. The renewables revolution is happening, but we must guide it toward justice, he said. It was an attempt to respond to an extraction frenzy that threatened to reduce the developing world into a mere space of exploitation, with no added value to benefit its economies, infrastructure, and knowledge production. Now, President Trump's return to power in 25 constituted a blow to efforts for a just transition. Getting hold of critical minerals became America's first priority, and language of cooperation was quickly replaced by transactional and neocolonialist approaches to extraction, further securitizing the global economic shift. Talks of buying or taking over Greenland, and the signing of a minerals agreement with Ukraine as a quid pro quo for U.S. continued involvement in peace negotiations with Russia constitute a break with promises of a just transition. Efforts to secure vital minerals like cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo led the Trump administration to also seek out a skeleton peace deal between Rwanda and the DRC signed in June of 2025. The premise of the deal was to stop the M23 rebels from holding onto mineral-rich DRC territory, Congo territory, in the eastern part of the country that they occupied and halt the smuggling out of minerals to fund their fight. Now, previous efforts to broker similar deals by Africans themselves had not been successful. So there is widespread skepticism as to whether this agreement will remain on paper, producing merely a symbolic win for a deal-making White House. But to justify U.S. involvement, Trump himself openly declared, "We're getting for the United States a lot of the mineral rights from the Congo as part of it." Not much has changed on the ground, but it does underscore the heavy-handed transactional approach to Washington's relations with its international partners. In 2025, in a brief by the UN Department of Social and Economic Affairs, once again, they sound the alarm, reiterating that the path to net zero puts critical minerals in the developing world center stage. With global cooperation, while global cooperation is essential for the transition, the rise of unilateral policies, trade restrictions, protectionist measures, nationalization of assets, threatens to fragment global critical mineral markets. The surge in unilateral trade restrictive measures in the critical mineral sector that affect both raw and processed materials has surged and deepened global inequalities. The report argued that the fragmentation heightens the risks for significant global economic and efficiency losses. Just like in 2010, rare earths and now other critical minerals are in the eye of the storm. On the one hand, they are indispensable for the next economic transformation and a key part of the last-ditch effort to help save the planet from a climate catastrophe. On the other, when weaponized geopolitically, they may turn into a catalyst for increasingly polemical and dangerous international relations. Now, what are the latest developments? Because every day there are developments in this area. The competition over critical minerals and their supply chains continues to grow. On June 16, Ursula von der Leyen presented a rare earth magnet, permanent magnet, made in Estonia in the G7 summit. That was her gift to the conference. She spotlighted that this magnet was produced by a Canadian company supported by the EU Just Transition Fund, and that the materials it contained were sourced from Australia, not China. Europe was now one step closer to building resilience and de-risking the supply chains necessary to electrify transport, deploy renewables, and build its tech capacity for the fourth industrial revolution. It has also been looking to find ways to navigate a very difficult relationship with Washington, build up its relations with Asia, Latin America, and Africa, and finding ways to work well with China. It now realizes, the European Union, I'm saying, that the electrification of transport is a must if the automotive industry is to survive in the 21st century. China's dominance in this sector ensures that the decarbonization of transport will continue globally, unabated. It increasingly has the buy-in of cities in the developing world that already see the impact of EV deployment on the levels of the atmospheric pollution they experience. The investment in renewables will also continue to increase because even fossil fuel producers like the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia are building up these infrastructures to release more of their fossil fuel product for export. The energy mix will be diverse and keep growing to include nuclear because AI has now upended all previous calculations of energy needs. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, by 2028, data servers alone could consume 12% of total U.S. electricity. And yet, the administration is canceling offshore wind projects that are almost complete. AI is an insatiable technology and now poses the biggest threat to climate action. In fact, the race to dominate the tech imperium has led the U.S. to declare an energy emergency. It is also a major reason why the U.S. has left Paris, the Paris Accord, but is also hell-bent in erasing climate as a global priority. This kind of frenzied deployment of technology that requires a slew of critical minerals, water, and energy threatens the world's best efforts to stall the worst impacts of the climate crisis. While the administration forgoes Biden's climate-framed green transition and the Trump Big Beautiful Bill strips away subsidies and tax credits, Washington continues to demand control of supply chains, from mine to market, principally in the name of security, i.e. the defense industry, that in fact has more restricted needs for these inputs. It's a paradox, and it remains to be seen whether Washington's decision decimates the U.S. car industry while the world moves on. China's advantage in these major industrial transformations is a sine qua non. It is set to become the world's first electric superpower, raising the big question on how that might shape the competition with the U.S., as it leans more heavily on its fossil fuel advantage. So we'll have the fossil fuel power and the electric power. What will that even mean for this competition? However, with strengths comes pushback and growing obligations. China is facing a more turbulent world in terms of politics, economics, and technology. To protect themselves, its competitors are all finding ways to use barriers, asking that China, at the very least, invest in their jurisdictions. In terms of its global leadership role, Beijing does not seem intent to fully replace the U.S., but it will not stand idly by, allowing Washington to win the bras de fer we are witnessing. It will continue to build strategic partnerships, and it will certainly defend and help shape global institutions to legitimize its claims and its positions, but also to help maintain a level of predictability in these turbulent times. Farther afield, the Gulf countries are now leveraging their sovereign funds to invest in mining, refining, but also across entire supply chains, working with both the U.S. and China to attract manufacturing. How long they can manage to be a bridge between these two rival superpowers remains to be seen, but they are actively working with both and increasing their global reach. The Gulf's clear change of status and power constitutes an important regional configuration, because while the Gulf booms, the rest of the Middle East is caught in a catastrophic spiral. Singapore, for instance, one last note, Singapore, for instance, has made AI a key priority of growth, with an eye to the 700 million Southeast Asian market. US and China tech companies are both racing to secure the lion's share, making this a geoeconomic power struggle. Although here too, there's confusion because NVIDIA just got permission to export a previously prohibited chip to China in exchange for paying 50% of their revenue to the US government. So, smoke and mirrors, there's much in the air. We are definitely in for a very bumpy road. The world will be a messier place and more conflict-prone. It has already become fragmented and less able to come together. And just as a warning, the US, the world knew, understood, and perhaps admired, will not be coming back, however domestic politics play out. The system is broken, and how things will reset, if they reset, is very unclear. But the climate crisis will wait for no one. It will not take a backseat while we decide who will have the upper hand. This is why it's of utmost importance to react to today's turbulence, but not get sucked into it. Somebody needs to be working on rewiring the world, not digitally necessarily, building new relations and ensuring that these technologies and the green transition are not for the few, but for society as a whole. Thank you.
Many takeaways from your remarks. That basically, rest of us are screwed, to put it very succinctly. But basically, China's dominance in critical minerals and the options that are open to the rest of us are actually pretty limited. And the clear warning that you're giving that we need to get into the action and not just be standing by. So you were talking about rewiring the world. Who is going to do that?
Well, I think that many are taking an initiative. I know that the European Union, for instance, now, of course, but they must have the worst public relations in the world. They're doing so much, and yet they get such a bad rap all the time because they're different member states, they're different political parties, everybody has an agenda. Anyway, so get away from that. Europe, for instance, is really opening up relations with Asia, coming closer with countries that, it did have a working relationship with and a trade relationship, but now it's really getting closer. Even relations with India are improving because India was very kind of skeptical because of the colonial past. They didn't really, love this closeness with Europe. But I think that now everybody is realizing that it doesn't matter if you're a big or a small country, you just need to be an action-oriented country. Like even Singapore is taking the lead on many of these issues as well, right? Trying to bring in new partners together for itself, of course, but also as a party that says, look, we represent stability, we represent, a jurisdiction that we can understand, that we can work with, and we want to invite like-minded other countries. And of course, China, I think, is also going to play a role. I just hope that China just doesn't sit back to watch all of this crumble. I think that it needs to try to deepen its collaborations with its existing partners. I mean, it has strategic partnership with the European Union, for instance. So there's a lot that can be done.
Yeah, so I think that actually many of the middle powers and regional institutions are actually reaching out to each other across different parts of the world. ASEAN is doing that with the Gulf countries, and then reaching out to Latin America as well, in the Pacific Alliance, Mercosur, and all sorts of things to try and get trade and global flows going and sustaining the world and trying to deal with new technologies, AI, emerging issues, and planetary crisis like the climate issue. So one other question before I open up to the floor. I'm assuming that people are preparing to ask questions. Okay, so I will ask you another question, which is, you mentioned that developing countries which are resource rich have been, the colonial past is about extractive industries, and that seems to be repeating itself again. And it's not just the US trying to do that, but also, China and going to third world countries, trying to get nickel, trying to get things that it needs for its supplies. What can these countries do to protect themselves, ensure growth, and still be part of this value chain, this global chain of critical minerals? What can it do that's different from what it wasn't able to do when they were colonies, right? I mean, they are much stronger than they are before. They are more modern than they are before, with modernized economies, modernized bureaucracies. And in a very interdependent, globalized world, what can these developing countries do to protect themselves and ensure that, these extractive industries they're just not another outpost, but the extraction is actually going to benefit their own economy? What can these countries do?
So I think, well, it depends on where we're looking at. The big problem is that in Africa, we're seeing many more countries falling into like a big black hole of instability, and there's conflict breaking out again, which is problematic. I think that the African Union, though, does have agency, and it has a really modern, I would say, and quite I would like to think of as a more equal or egalitarian or true partnership with the European Union, for instance. So I think that there is a lot of agency, for example, in Africa, but again, they're different players coming in. So for example, the Gulf countries are investing in mining in Africa and Latin America, but they're becoming regional players in East Africa. So it also is really important in these countries that are rising and we're creating these new regional affiliations to come in with a more holistic approach. So ESG standards, for instance, that we've almost forgotten now, but that Europe has set forward. It has the most advanced scheme of standards that it's been trying to really project and enforce. I think these things are going to play a key role. I sound a little like long-winded in my answer because there is a real question, which is, for example, there are countries in South America that might be nationalizing their mines. Sounds great. Economists might tell you, oh my God, the state can't be the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. They don't know what they're doing. They are inefficient. It's the private sector that knows what it's doing. Well, we've also seen the private sector, how well it knows what it's doing. It's like the taxpayer is footing the bill. So, and then the other question is, just because something is nationalized, does it mean that it's helping the assets, the money is going to help the local communities? It's very holistic. And here, apart from nation states, stakeholders are going to have to play a very important role.
Yeah.
And in different countries, the level of influence of different stakeholders varies. Like the idea of what does it mean to profit from this it takes a lot of conversation. Right? On a standard level, it sounds like I'm making more revenue, I'm having more taxes, but then what? What is it actually doing? Is it protecting the ecosystem for the future generations? Is it really putting this money in education? So a lot of things have to be combined.
Yeah, so good policies really matter in protecting the people and the next generation and all. I forgot to mention that in my introduction that actually Sophia was a Greek politician for like 10 years. Yeah, and she was representing a resource-rich area.
Yes.
A resource that is called olives.
Yes.
So she's that was before she became
a recovering politician.
Yes, a recovering politician, which before she's became an academic.
Which is why I'm so passionate about policy.
Yes, I know.
Because, and I'm so excited to be in the policy environment, because the reality is that you can study and research all you want, but the idea, how do you implement this on the ground? How to take some aspirations or ideas and actually make them into policy that actually works. Because policy A is messy. It can never be 100%. So nobody likes to say that somebody's going to lose out of any policy. Politicians hate to sound like they're not doing it for everyone. So it's a struggle. And I think that in academia, we actually have an opportunity to really go into depth. I remember when I was in politics, I spoke more than I researched. Now I research more than I speak. Now I have both together. I don't know what to do with myself. Like, oh my God, no, don't say this. This is what you should be saying.
Okay, wonderful. Questions from the floor. Okay, please go to the mic. First of all, identify yourself. Tell us your affiliation and try to keep the questions short. Yeah.
Thank you very much for an excellent speech. My name is Shantanu. I'm an ex-banker. My question to you is that you made a couple of statements about how China has made this whole critical minerals piece, the whole supply chain. What will it actually take for people to compete with this, given the fact that they practically control the entire piece? And in that light, you also mentioned about what countries can do. And we've seen Indonesia, for example, trying to use its ability to use nickel, right? Of course. But ultimately, what's happening is that the people who are actually implementing it are the Chinese, and they are taking on that resource. So really, that overarching thing around the world where the Chinese have gone into all parts of the world and gotten that supply chain, how easy is that for other people to replicate? And should they be replicating it in the first place? And the instances of Indonesia, cobalt out of, from Africa, people trying to make sure that it doesn't get sent out and processes internally, but is it really working? It doesn't seem to be in some cases. Thank you.
Okay, maybe Sophia can answer that question, and then we'll see how many we have, and then we'll try and gather a few answers together. But maybe just answer.
I'll answer this question. Okay, this is a bazillion-dollar question. I mean, first of all, there is no plan B. There's no option now. The geopolitics are so contentious, and the hyper competition is such that all these countries have been struggling now to create, they're replicating supply chains. In fact, it's going to be more expensive. It could be redundant. It takes a ton of money, might I say taxpayer money, right? All this thing about the private sector is all subsidized by every taxpayer money. This is not some miracle that happens that these companies are picking up the tab. They come to the European Union and they say, you want a magnet factory? You need to give me this, this, and this to set it up, right? So we've moved into this. This is what the reality is. It shouldn't have had to happen this way. But now here we are. This is why for so long I've been saying this is, ties of interdependence is so important. Why don't we, don't raise the realist volume? Now it's all broken. The reality is there's going to be some reconfiguration, but they're going to have to be alternate supply chains. And in fact, they're going to be costly. It's going to take time, which is why the Europeans, the Americans have abandoned electrification of transport and renewables because they can't compete, and they're putting all their money in the AI basket. The Europeans realize that we've been there's no big industrial country without cars. If we want to sell cars, we're going to have to do this. China was making electric vehicles and Europeans were making diesel cars. They're so far behind. So they're going to rush, they're going to struggle, they're going to try to do their best. And I think that China is going to have to play a role here. They can't kill all the competition. They're going to have to take the hand of some of their competition if they want to not be kicked out of particular jurisdictions entirely. Because people have to protect local jobs. We know it's a balancing act, right? So it's unfortunate that we got to where we are, and now we're going to have to go through all of the pain and suffering and cost and time, which we don't have. And hopefully we will be able to, come out with new relationships. The other thing I want to say is that, at least under Biden, there were these actions to create like collaborations with U.S. partners. This has now all been destroyed. So, Europe and the United States cannot be really collaborating. They just came out and told them that we're not going to sell you technology if you tax Apple, Google, and Facebook, Meta. So it's becoming very difficult. There's a lot of pulling and tugging and.
Thank you, Sophia, for such a wonderful lecture. I'd like to invite you to put together two different parts of the lecture to reconcile a message. In your earlier book, you warned us about the criticality of having China control so much of the global supply chain in rare earths. At that point, to use modern geopolitical language, China had all the cards.
Mm-hmm.
Ursula von der Leyen, thanks to her permanent magnet, made in Canada, sourced from materials in Australia, has reduced some of China's cards. This is valuable because we always worry about China being the revisionist power with its sharp elbows forcing the rest of us to do what it wants. That related to the one part of your talk. But the other part of your talk was about America. It is actually not China that's disrupting the world, being revisionist in world order. It's actually America that's doing that. Totally blindsided us. We didn't think that was going to where it was going to come from. So my question to you is, does America hold too many cards? What can the rest of us do, if not to take away America's cards the way Ursula von der Leyen did China? What can the rest of us do to degrade America's cards so that it is now less disruptive for the rest of us? Thank you.
Okay, and then gentleman there, yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Sulusani from South Africa. You did not mention BRICS even once. And
Did.
in
passing though, but go on.
Yeah. What's the role of BRICS? And especially from where I come from, we are a member of BRICS, but we are under pressure to pick sides, and we don't really want to, but we're being forced to. What's the role of BRICS?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Raj Matthew from India. I'm a lawyer and a politician. In the sense that earlier, when countries were wanting technology from the developed world, we were never offered a free trade in any terms. It was always a barter system. So how practical is it to accept that it won't be happening with the minerals that are there? And the second part of the question is, if the Asian subcontinent benefits, or the South African subcontinent benefits from weaponizing minerals that we have now, that we have found in our own countries, to have a barter system with the developed world, what harm is it to us? It's the same thing that was done to us.
So three sets of questions.
Okay.
The first,
Couple of things. Okay, I think maybe I'll start with BRICS. I think that BRICS can be a very powerful organization. And I actually did say that, in passing, admittedly, that, and from China's perspective, that it is, is member of different kinds of organizations among which is BRICS Plus, and it has all these relations with Africa and Latin America and other parts of the world. I definitely think that certain actors in BRICS are playing a role. Like, for example, the UAE, as I said, is now becoming an investor, a mediator. They want to be a bridge between the two great powers, the United States and China. I definitely think that the BRICS need to work together because they actually represent so much more than people think in terms not only of population, but as to their percentage of the economy. Now, I realize that African countries are particularly under pressure and they're loath to pick sides. And it's actually, I would say, almost embarrassing because the United States has degraded its relations with Africa to such an extent. It's practically dismantling the Africa Bureau, but then it steps in to do some kind of mineral peace deal that benefits supposedly access to particular minerals. So, this kind of cynical approach, I think, does not make it very easy for African nations individually or as the African Union to really negotiate with the United States. I think that there is a tripartite dialogue between the EU and China and the African Union that I think could be a great forum, because there, with the agency now that African nations have, they can talk to the other two very significant powers that are different in order to be able to bring them closer together to create some kind of consensus, right? Because China, there's a lot of criticism about what China has done in Africa, but also China took risks by investing in the real economy where all the Europeans and the Americans had checked out. Cold War was over. The Americans exited stage left from Africa. The Europeans stayed, but they also didn't have, they did a lot of aid, they did a lot of support, they were all about norms and values, and so they have a significant presence there. Economic presence, but also sort of a much more holistic partnership. So I definitely think the tripartite dialogue between the three would be a great place to start so that everybody doesn't feel this enormous pressure to have to pick sides. It is a bad idea to pick sides right now.
Okay. And Danny's question about cards. Yeah. Cards.
Okay.
How to take away Trump's cards.
Well, I have to say it is not my style. But in this instance, the only way, I've been advocating for years and I've been in the minority where I've been saying, you know what, with respect to, because I look at things from climate perspective, and I thought, you know what, please don't make the U.S. and China the climate leaders, because the U.S. has not decided what it thinks about climate. So I wrote a whole book about this. Of course, again, it was a minority view. I definitely think that it's impossible. Like, if somebody could just stop talking to the U.S., that would be a nice solution. Except that's not possible. So I think in politics, what you do is you secure the base, you keep having this conversation, you have parallel conversations. And in fact, whenever I wanted to actually achieve anything in politics, is I spent time putting a lot of focus here when I was working in the background there. Because this is what a lot of nations are doing. They're actually sitting there, they're going back and forth to the Oval Office, they're talking to the United States, because what else can they do? Like, every day there's a new problem. But they're also they have to have more teams working in order to do the rewiring that I mentioned. That is the only way in order to survive this tsunami of instability. They cannot be sucked into this web. I think, you're going to have to, for us women, it's easy to understand because we multitask. We just have to juggle all the balls in the air. You have to do everything at the same time. You're going to have to work with the United States in some way, shape, or form, knowing the problems, but you're going to also have to develop, your partnerships on the side.
I think Danny is coming from the viewpoint of the world minus one.
Okay, it's hard.
Yeah. So the question about
India.
Yeah, India.
Okay, I don't want to do injustice to your question, but I want to see if I understood it correctly. So you're saying that will it benefit countries that have discovered, let's say, critical minerals, like India has discovered new troves of certain critical minerals, to even export them because they haven't been getting the tech. They've had to face tech barriers, right? This is a very real conversation that needs to be had. And and with a group of colleagues, we've been looking at ways by which mineral-rich countries can also propose some kind of protocol, right? They need to kind of all get together. And we had suggested, for example, that IRENA could spearhead such a conversation. It's going to be hard one-on-one to be able to do this. I believe in the power of collaboration and numbers. And this is a very good moment for mineral-rich countries to say, okay, let's look at the whole picture. Let's set the table. We have these minerals. What else do we want? Do we want to be able to refine them? Then what kind of added value? Will you share the technologies? This is a very real, very big issue. And one country cannot go it alone.
Thanks for your speech. My name is Atul, and I'm a professional from the capital markets industry. In the context of what you shared, what role does US dollar play going forward? And do you see one single currency as an alternative to US dollar emerging in the coming years?
Okay. And the gentleman there.
I'd make a lot of money if I knew the answer to this question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, Parag from Asia Competitiveness Institute. I had a question about, so the securitization of essential commodities is nothing new. So what is it about critical minerals, especially rare earth metals, that such a concentration of supply chains occurred, given the fact that they're not extraordinarily capital intensive or technology intensive? Yes, why the policy blind spot?
Hello. I work for the Environmental and Social Safeguard for Asian Development Bank, focusing on trade and supply chain finance, looking at critical minerals, all the way from Kazakhstan to Caledonia. So my question is, how should development finance institution improve its safeguards? Because it's no longer about indigenous rights only. Now it includes geopolitics. Usually in ESG or development finance or private finance, usually we don't talk about that.
Yeah.
Maybe. Thanks.
I work in the sector of crimes that affect the environment, particularly crimes in the mineral sector. But in this case, I'd be interested to know what role should the United Nations play in easing the tension between these two big superpowers? Or do you even think that there is even a meaningful role for the UN in this space? Thank you.
I'll start with the last one since this is like the freshest.
Okay.
So the UN, I would say, the reality is right now that the UN has sort of been sidelined for many, many reasons. There's just been too many crises. It's overburdened. It's bureaucratic. However, I believe that it is something that we need to safeguard because this is at least the one place where we all get together. So it may seem right now that it's a weak institution or to many irrelevant, but we should not fall in this trap. It took a lot of hard work to create such an institution. And now that we're all at the table together, in some way, shape, or form, we need to stay there. Exiting is not a good strategy. So the UN has, as I said, the head of the UN has really said that, critical minerals, it can't trample on the poor. You can't just completely exploit what's left of the earth. And now sea mining is becoming a big, hot topic. China, Japan, there's a lot of interest in sea mining, and the UN is trying to find a solution even to try to safeguard that. So I definitely think that I think the role of ESG right now also it sounds like, oh my God, who can talk about ESG when we have tariffs all day long? But this is, again, let's not pay so much attention to the noise. Some people will deal with the noise, but then some people have to sit in the back and work out the kinks in the system.
Yeah.
And this is what we need to do. I know it from politics. It's like every day there's a new topic. And this is why politicians know so much about everything and so little about everything. Because you keep having to multitask and change There have to be teams. I'm a very big supporter of this in the background that needs to be working. Academia, policy schools. I mean, there are places, there are people out there. It's just that they don't spend all their time, waiting outside of politicians' offices. They're actually in the classroom. They're in the research labs. This is what they're doing. We need to find these people. In terms of rare earths. So what rare earths, people say they're not so rare, except, they exist everywhere. They may exist in some flower pot outside. The problem is that there are traces of them. They're very difficult to process, to mine. You have to find where it's economically feasible to mine them, right? So China had the advantage that it had this big iron ore mine and they took out all the tailings and they threw them in a pond. And then somebody discovered applications, because you can have all the minerals in the world and not know what to do with them. Once they discovered that rare earths could do particular things really well, they actually invested heavily in developing a strategy, the metallurgy, because each resource is different. So you have to treat it differently. It's not like a one way of processing. So they really developed an expertise in how to use them, and this is how they managed to, they had them sitting there. They also have a lot of heavy rare earths that other countries do not have. So for example, the United States, the single mine in the United States has light rare earths. Light rare earths are not the ones that we really want for the magnets. We want the heavy ones that can withstand the huge temperatures for, let's say, the car acceleration, right? They're trying to substitute, replace them, reduce dependence. It's all a matter of efficiency. If you want the better model, you can drive a Fiat and you can drive a BMW and you can drive a Lamborghini. It depends. Like, what are you trying to get out of this product? So heavy rare earths China really has an upper hand there. A lot of these minerals come with radioactive signatures, which creates a huge problem, which is what Lynas is facing. It went to Malaysia. It opened its processing plant. They've been getting, they keep shutting them down. Now they're creating a new processing plant, which is totally over budgeted. In Australia, they have to do something with all of this nuclear thorium waste, and there's nowhere to really store it. We kind of pretend we're storing the stuff. So this is why. So if China was able and ready to sell it to everybody at affordable prices, and the market and all the companies were moving to China because it was a big market, because they had cheaper labor costs, for all the reasons everybody moved to China in the first place, that's how they recognized this and they thought of it strategically in the long run, in the long term. In terms of the currency, so I honestly don't know. I don't know what to hope for. Being from the Western world, I really hope the dollar doesn't collapse. On a personal note. However, or the euro. But I think the monetary basket is going to, the percentages are going to probably shift around some. It really depends on what's going to happen in the United States in the end. How investors are going to feel about whether this currency is really still a safe currency. And I'm going to throw this out there, not because I actually even have the answer to this, but that's like my next question. So with all these tariffs, there's a lot of money that the government's going to rake in. It'll be interesting to see what he does with it. Is it going to be subsidizing particular clientele? For example, he might, depending on the election, you can go and offer subsidies to particular populations. All young people will get $100 to, I don't know, whatever. I don't know how this money is going to be used. So I think a lot remains to be seen as to what's going to happen. We have to wait and see. But for sure, there's a shakeup happening.
Safeguards. Financial institutions, can they improve their safeguards?
Financial
A
institutions.
question from the gentleman from ADB.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes. So interesting. That, I mean, I know that ADB is it's taken a leading role in, let's say, I would call it like a wider climate portfolio in green finance. In fact, one of my students worked for ADB for a very long time. He's from Nepal. Yes, you met him, Rastra. So I've heard all about all the green financing instruments that ADB is trying to use. ADB, at least, you have a particular purview, geographic, for sure. I think that geopolitics are going to play a role, but countries that are applying for funding from ADB have particular specific projects that they're trying to get off the ground, and there is a rationale for it. So I think as long as the rationale makes sense in the context, the rest, I don't think the bank has to sort of factor it into the risk, but I don't think the bank can take a geopolitical position per se. The best way to safeguard it is to make sure that all these projects are really actually valid and mature, and that they tie in to a sort of a regional approach that, what is Asia trying to achieve through this kind of a green transformation?
Okay. Thank you very much, Sophia. I think I learned a lot in terms of critical minerals, of course, but also that this need for really good government and public policies to really tide us over this entire tsunamis that are coming. And I think that's a call for action for all of us, not just only in surviving this fracturing world, but also for the climate crisis and all the various transitions that we're going through. So thank you for a very enlightening session, and thank you for being a great audience with all your good questions. Thank you.